Hello and welcome to the Kilowatt Half Hour, your weekly roundup about the world of electric cars, brought to you by the team at electrifying.com. This week, we're turning our attention to the used market. So we'll be chatting about the cars we've been driving, and of course, we'll be answering your electric car questions and dipping into the postbag. Welcome to the show. I'm Ginny.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Manos.
We have a very special guest. We have Manos. Yay!
Who's normally on the other side of the camera.
He is, and also edits the podcast. So Manos is our long-suffering head of video. Is that a fair? Particularly when you're working with me, Nicola, or Nikki, you're long-suffering then, aren't you?
Yes, sometimes, especially when it's all of you together. It's a
What?
bit.
Just out of interest, what is it like when you get the three of us together? How would you
Do you
describe
have
that?
any moment when you reconsider all the choices in your life that led you up to that moment? Yeah, that's exactly how it is.
Okay. All right. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Anyway, Manos is joining us because last week the podcast, Tom, that you and Mike did in the car, which has had an amazing response. We'll come back to that later. You were chatting about cars that you had, those kind of cars that you perhaps we shouldn't love, but we do. Is that the gist of it?
That's about right. Yeah, we couldn't understand. We couldn't explain why we loved them, but we
Yeah.
did.
And Manos came up. Why did Manos come up?
Because he loves the Jeep Avenger, which is a car that we consider nice, but Manos has a irrational love of it, especially since he generally loves sort of V8s and fast V6s and things. And suddenly he fell in love with this small electric SUV, and we can't explain why. So he is here to explain.
Do you want to tell us, Manos? And let's just put some context to this. So you and I have known each other a very long time.
Yes.
Like literally, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something. Perhaps it's coming up to now. When I first met you, you used to drive down to where we used to shoot. It was for a different channel many years ago at a place called Longcross, just outside London. And you'd drive down from Leeds. And what car would you drive down in, Manos?
Mark IV Toyota Supra.
Yeah.
Couldn't fit all my tripods in, so I had to take the passenger seat off so I could lay the tripods in.
So just with that context, listeners, it's quite a long journey from that to the Avenger, the Jeep Avenger. In fact, I couldn't think of two more contrasting cars. So what do you love about the Avenger? Why is it your guilty pleasure?
So it's a bit long story. Like, I'm biased a bit because I always loved Jeep as a brand.
Okay.
I grew up loving having a Jeep Wrangler, uh, and I love boxy shaped cars in general. The same way, like we discussed on the other day, I love the new Fiat Panda.
Yeah.
It's very boxy. With the Avenger, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. But out of all, because a lot of Stellantis cars are based on the same platform. And I think when other cars pretend to be small city cars, but they're literally small SUVs, the Avenger, it is a small SUV and doesn't pretend to be anything else. And I love that fact about it.
You
And
love.
we always say that we want electric cars with smaller footprint, and I think that belongs to that category. I think that's it.
That's a brilliant explanation. I don't know, and it's interesting because I was with you when you first saw that car. And literally, it was an instant reaction. You literally were just like, you were muttering to yourself as you were filming it. Oh, it's so nice. Oh, it's like, is he all right? So it was an instant thing. That's a brilliant explanation, Tom. Do you? Yeah. And I
I
guess
agree.
there is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, it's a very rational one. Okay. Well, thank you. Are you
It
going to
has
join
its
us?
downfalls. Like it wouldn't work practically for me because I have a lot of equipment to carry. It doesn't work. Like I tried to do one that has to put all the seats down in order to fit all my kit in, but I still love it.
All right, here's the question for you. If we said to you, here's a Jeep Avenger for a year, Manos, use it as your crew car, would you want to use it, or would you rather have a different choice, something more practical?
I want to use. I'll make it work.
And that is what a guilty pleasure is all about, ladies and gentlemen. Are you joining us for the rest of the podcast, Manos?
Maybe not because I have to publish a video today.
Oh, okay. We
Yeah,
do.
there's a 3008 versus the Renault Scenic. It's coming on today. It's Friday, so you will
Okay.
be watching this podcast by Sunday. So if you haven't checked the video already, go and watch straight after.
That's true. And also, everyone, please, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do, because every time you subscribe, like Manos's smile just gets a little bit bigger. It really does. It's like a little, he almost gets a little kind of notification when another subscriber's
And you
landed.
see that silver thing back there? I want to turn it gold one day.
Oh, that's our YouTube
Mm.
hack. It is, absolutely. It is. Okay. Manos, thank you for joining us. And of course, if you have guilty pleasures yourselves, do let us know. If you're listening to this, it's podcast@electrifying.com. If you're watching on YouTube, just drop a comment in the comments below. Right, Manos, off you go. Won't keep you any longer.
Bye
Bye.
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 He really loves that car. He really
He
does. And I
does.
guess
He
I
does.
guess that's the thing. You actually did contact us with quite a few of your other guilty pleasures, so we'll come back to those in a moment. But Tom,
Mhm.
last week's podcast, you've created a storm of messages and emails. People loved seeing you and Mike in the car. It was very
Well,
funny.
it was kind of, we invented that just to get away from you girls wittering, really, because we were trying to do it at the barn where we do all our filming, and we thought, where are we going to go where it's quiet? And there was nowhere. So we're just like, because one of you would come in and start talking about handbags or something, and then Nicola would
That's
come in and start screaming and hi guys or something. So it was like, right, we're going to have to go somewhere quiet. Where are we going to go? And the car was the perfect place, and it actually worked really well.
I think Vicky Parrott, myself, and Nicola, who were the girls that were at Electrifying HQ on that day in question, I think we will all take offence to that because we were not
Really?
talking about handbags. We
Do you
were
never talk about
talking
handbags?
not often. We weren't doing it. Okay, sometimes not that day though. We were actually talking about efficiency on cars because that's the other kind of, that's just what we're like. We like handbags, we like efficiency on cars. There we go. But it was interesting. We got some really good comments. Stephen O'Donoghue 9876. One of the reasons I love the channel is the female editorial and reviewing. Thank you for that. It shouldn't be. I mean, it's just fun, isn't it? We're sat
Mm.
around last week, Tom, and there's like 3 girls, 2 blokes, and we're just all chatting about cars, and it's really fun. So it's just nice. But he did say, however, you two sitting in the back of a car was great. How about a separate monthly? 2 old guys in the back of a car, Kilowatt Half Hour. Choose a different car each theme and give us a review of the car. I think it's such a good idea.
Why not? Yeah. I'm
I
up
don't know
for
what you
that.
think of the title. Do you mind the title?
Old man. Well, I feel quite old sometimes, so yeah, that's fine.
I just thought it was really fun. And then also SWR112 said, with a laugh emoji, the guy, how uncomfortable do the guys look doing this? I think he sort of meant physically. If we don't get the
Mm,
girls doing this, we've got to have them. So I think maybe that's a challenge. Maybe
yeah.
Nick and I need to do one as well. And then Mark Bennett, you guys just need to add the karaoke element, and this new format will be perfect.
You don't want to hear me singing, believe me.
Or me. I think we will. We'll come. We're going to absolutely take those suggestions. We can't do it every week because we're just not all together at the same time. But I think whenever we are, we're going to try and do more of those. Let's just get in a car and chat about it and do the podcast from there.
So, sort
That's
of
good.
behind the scenes, there was a ridiculous thing where Mike had his actual iMac, like not a laptop, the
Yeah.
proper one, propped on the center console of the car, and then we had the microphone there, and we would, and he had it going through the vehicle to load. In the back of his car, and it logged onto the Wi-Fi of the barn. It was all a bit Heath Robinson, but it worked well in the end.
It looked brilliant, and honestly, blooming hell, those screens, they're just getting too big in cars, aren't they? It's ridiculous. Just too much. Right, let's move on. So what have you been driving over the last week? In fact, should we chat about used cars actually?
Oh
Because
yes, yeah.
because you and Mike had a really good chat about that on the podcast last week, and you were talking about used car prices coming down, which is something we've seen. It's official now. We've had the data from the gurus, haven't we? So we do know that actually electric cars are much
Now,
more affordable than they were.
yeah, so they're now, according to CAP HPI, who are like the industry experts and look at all the prices of these things, an electric car at 3 years old is now 8.5% cheaper than an equivalent petrol or diesel. And at 4 years old, it goes up to 14% cheaper.
Wow.
So, I mean, there are all sorts of economics behind that, but it basically means that if you want an electric car now, there are some real bargains out there. There's
Yeah.
some amazing figures as well. So, compared to the summer of 2022, which was when we'd just come out of pandemics and there was a real shortage of cars, a Porsche Taycan the same age, same miles, is now £40,000 cheaper than it was then.
That's
Uh,
insane.
Jag I-Pace, Mercedes EQC, Tesla Model X are all £20,000 cheaper.
Yeah.
So those are
I
some
think
big numbers.
they are big numbers. I think it's probably important to point out that that period was unnaturally high. It was like nothing
Mm,
we'd seen before. So
mm,
yes, there have been big drops. Unfortunately, a lot of people have been stung by that. And it's really important to point out that they've not been stung by massive falling values in electric cars. They've been stung by the fact that the prices were so inflated
yeah.
because we'd come out of the pandemic, we had the supply
Mm,
shortages, and that was literally the whole market, petrol, diesel, electric, was really high. And I
mm,
think I did a couple of programs around that time about that very subject. And I know at one point we were looking at used prices, and I
mm,
think the most inflated price we saw from memory was an ID4 in a dealership in Blackpool
mm.
that was £70,000. Is that
Yeah, and I think there
yeah?
was a £60,000 ID3 as well. I mean, it was nuts. They were just chancing their arm.
So yeah, and I think that does all have to be seen. But it's really good news, isn't it? Basically, and we've seen lots of private buyers who are really still, unfortunately, priced out of electric cars because, as we know and as we talk about on this podcast a lot, Tom, it's so new. The new electric car purchase favours company car buyers, doesn't it? Through
Yeah,
great
absolutely. All the
deals and
tax
benefit in
benefits,
kind.
all the tax benefits go to the company car buyer when they're new, but when they're used, they just make such sense. And I suppose the dealers are still working against people who've got these prejudices against electric cars for whatever reason, and then suddenly you say, "Well, it's cheaper than a petrol. I can save a fortune here."
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so that was our chat last week. That now has been, in fact, proved true. That we are definitely reaching that point of, well, not even price parity. So EVs are actually more affordable. Okay, what else has been in the news, Tom? Anything caught your eye?
Well, something that caught my eye was I think it's going to be when this podcast goes out, according to weather forecast, about 30 degrees. So you'll all be feeling the heat. And of course, you get into your electric car, and the same as in winter when it's cold and you have to use the climate control to get the temperature up, and that uses a lot of energy. You have to use the aircon to get the temperature down. So Nissan have been working on a paint that reflects the heat better. So the difference between, I suppose, a white car in hot weather and a black car. And it will save, they reckon, well, maybe about 5% of your range in really hot weather, but just by reflecting the heat away from the car and meaning that your interior is a bit cooler, which is nice, isn't it? All these little incremental improvements in range just can make a difference.
Is it April the 1st? Have I missed the? No,
No, they've been
we did.
testing it and it works. Apparently, the problem is at the moment that it's about 6 times as thick as normal paint. So it's so heavy that it takes away any efficiency gains. But they're working on getting it lower. And also, apparently, it's got a chalky finish. Can you imagine?
That sounds
Like you
awful. And
see.
you have to chip it off with a chisel when you need to get a respray on it. Brilliant. Okay. Right. Okay. We'll park that one for now, but it's a great idea in theory. In theory. So what have you been driving, Tom?
Well, the one thing I've driven and I have a controversial view on
Okay.
was Mike and I mentioned last week that there's a Tesla Model 3 Performance that we had in.
Yeah.
And I had a
Yeah, we
quick
did.
go in it, and I think it's too fast. Now,
It
I'm
is.
aware.
Would completely agree.
I'm aware that makes me sound like an old fuddy duddy, and the younger me would have gone, "Pah, you big girl," or something. But I don't see why the car needs to be that fast. I think it's a bit worrying that car is £60,000. You can have one for £600 a month, probably less if you're on some sort of employee scheme or a company car, and it does 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. Now that would have been faster than any supercar from. It's probably sort of Formula One car territory, and I mean it
Mm.
is. They call it a ludicrous mode because it is ludicrous. Now, I did hear from somebody in the insurance industry that most Teslas, and they're really high insurance group, that's
Mhm.
because they take them out and they show them off, and in the first 2 weeks, most Tesla crashes happen. But it
Really?
just worries me that if you take that car and someone says, "Show me the acceleration," you're going to do it, and after 4 seconds, you're going to be doing
Yeah.
such a silly speed that you're going to have a big accident. And apart from the safety side of it, I don't see why cars need to be that fast. It needs bigger brakes, it needs bigger tyres, it needs thicker drive shafts, it needs all sorts of things which go against the efficiency. So, does anybody really need a car that does 0 to 60 in like less than 5 seconds, really, in the real world? Are you going to use it?
I think we agreed on this pretty much, you and I, because there's a number of cars, in particular, a couple of Volvos that we just think are too quick, and there's
Yeah,
just no point. And they're family cars. Do you need that? And I think there's a really quite serious point here that it is one of the things about switching to electric that can take a bit of getting used to. Is you do have that instantaneous torque. It's
yeah.
so much quicker, and that can be a lot to handle. I know my mum, for example, when she first drove her electric car, unfortunately she did have an accident. Luckily, she wasn't going at a particularly high speed, but it was that instant speed that had just taken her. She was fine, damage to the car, but she found it too much. She just couldn't deal with it, and I think that's a really common thing. And I've been in a Polestar 2 for the last week, and if you get the performance version of that, the performance pack, the 0 to 60 time on that is 4 seconds.
Mm,
And it's a car. I mean, it's not okay. It's not the Model 3 performance time, but it's still 4 seconds. Like
mm.
you say, we go back 10 years, and that was sports cars probably quicker than a 911, isn't it? 4 seconds,
Yeah,
0 to
yeah.
60.
I mean, I can see why the car companies do it. I was speaking to someone from Jaguar a few years ago, and I said, "Look, why don't you do an I-Pace that has just one motor and make it cheaper?" And he said, "Well, because a car which does 0 to 60 in 4 seconds and has 400 horsepower, we can charge £60,000 for because it's comparable to other 400 horsepower cars.
Yeah.
Whereas if we take a motor out and it's only 200 horsepower, then we have to charge £30,000 for it because that's what the comparison is to other 200 horsepower cars, and it doesn't cost us £30,000 to add that extra motor."
Yeah.
So I could see that Tesla can go, "Look, we've got this great value car. It's only £60,000 and it does 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. But I'd much rather have better efficiency and cheaper tyres and all the other things that would benefit from it and lower insurance groups rather than have a car which does 0 to 60 in 2.9.
But maybe we're all fuddy duddies. I don't
Mm,
know. Let us know what you think in the comments below, or drop us an email, because maybe actually that it's great, that those cars are there for people that want it. I mean, I share that same view with you. Or do perhaps manufacturers need to start thinking about reining in some of that instant performance, that we don't necessarily need it in, the bulk of these cars are SUVs. Do we need SUVs with these ridiculous 0 to 60 times? Yes, we talk about the fact that it's handy to have that punch if you're overtaking, but again, do you really need it? I don't know. It's an interesting one, and I do wonder. I think particularly the Tesla one, because I've read that report as well, that shows that so many of those accidents with Model 3s and with Teslas generally happen in those early weeks because people just can't handle that level of speed, and I'm sure that's reflected across the board. But let us know, as always, what you think. So just going back to the Polestar 2, though, I didn't have the really quick one. I had the standard version, long range single motor. Claim range of over 400 miles from that 82 kilowatt hour battery. And actually, it reminded me, Tom, how much I like that car. I know you touched
mm,
on that last week on the podcast. It is a lovely thing, isn't it? It's really just feels upmarket. It's really well put together. It's got a
yeah.
nice blend of. It's got the screen, which works really well. It's got the buttons and some switches as well. I think it looks fantastic. It rides really nicely. But for the first time in a car, I found myself not using CarPlay, and I used the Google Brain, and I used it for routes and navigation, and because it works so well. I think I've been
Mm,
doing that a bit in the Scenic, actually. And I just think it's been around for a long time, but it is a great car. But the thing that disappointed me was the efficiency. Just coming back to that point we've been talking about, because it's meant to be topping out over 400. I was getting 15, 20% less than that.
mm.
Um, and that it shouldn't be doing that, not in the weather that we've had recently, not in the height of summer. But I don't know. It's got a big battery. It's a bit disappointing you're not getting close to that range, but I did enjoy driving it. Um, and actually, just going back to the thing we've been talking about guilty pleasures, we had a message in from Stan at Kangaroo Island TV, our old friend Stan.
Mm.
and he said his guilty pleasure is my own Polestar 2 long range. He loves everything about it. He enjoys driving it so much he might drive it right round Australia soon, clockwise. There you go.
It made a real difference, that car, going to rear-wheel drive, didn't it? It was much
Yes, it
nicer,
did.
as it did with the Volvo. It was much more efficient and it was nicer to
Yeah.
drive.
Yeah, exactly. The balance is just completely feels right on that now. Right. So, do you have a deal of the week for us, Tom?
Well, yeah, I have some would you rathers. Okay.
Okay, go
So
on. We like would you
this week,
rather's.
the cheapest electric car leases I could find were all around the same size and around the same money, but there is a few quid in it. So see what you reckon. So the cheapest car, as has been for the past few weeks, is a Nissan Leaf, because they're obviously clearing out all the stocks. So a Nissan Leaf Techno, and bearing in mind this is 8,000 miles a year, 3-year deal with a 6 months deposit, is £178 a month. I mean, I know people who pay more than that for their Sky.
That's so cheap.
It's
That's
ridiculously cheap, isn't it? Yeah. Now, if you wanted something a little more modern, would you pay an extra £11 a month for a Citroen EC4?
oh, I think I might. Although, well, yeah, I might because that car's getting an update towards the end of this year.
Yeah. So this is the old battery electric motor, so 211 miles range. Or would you pay another 18 quid a month to have an Astra? And it's a Astra Ultimate, so it's the top of the range C4, top of the range Astra. Now that Astra does have the better battery and motor, so it's more
Okay. What's
efficient.
the range on that?
253, I think.
Well, if I was buying the car that I just like the most, I'd go for the Citroen EC4 in terms of just sort of practicality and what it
Mm-hmm.
offers. But as always, I think a lot of people buy on range. And I think that range then for the money, I think that's probably the one to go for, the Astra. But they really are some good deals at the moment. And I think we're getting to this point, aren't we, where cars are now starting to come into their second generation. So
Yeah.
we've got, EC4, it's been updated, new versions of that coming out later this year. The Leaf will go and the Leaf will come back. And I think this is where now we're starting to see some really good deals coming around, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd probably have the Citroen, but the Leaf, if I
Yeah.
didn't need to fast charge, because obviously the Leaf has CHAdeMO, which is a bit of a pain and is a bit slower, then I might be tempted just to have a Leaf for, 170
170
quid a
quid.
month.
Of course you'd have a Leaf
Cheap,
because
isn't
that's your answer to everything in life.
it? Like you and
Have a
Skoda
Leaf.
Enyaqs.
Maybe. Okay, let's go on to some emails that we've had in. And if you do want to email us, it is podcast@electrifying.com. Okie doke. Where are we? We've got this one from Clayton Nickel. Hello, Clayton. Clayton said, I find your work excellent and informative. Thank you so much. It's lovely when people tell us things like that. But Clayton has a suggestion. So you review cars that have yet to be on the market at press events or when you get to drive them, you give them scores. Why not give your audience a time frame during these videos for when the vehicle will be available to be ordered or when these cars can be test driven by us, and then score them on how quickly they come to the market? It's a very interesting suggestion, one that would be quite tricky to implement, Tom, wouldn't it? And that's because often when we get into the cars, we're getting them for international first drives or really early first looks. And quite frankly, the manufacturers in the UK, they don't have firm pricing details at that point, and they don't know when they're going to get the cars generally.
Mm.
It's fair.
I think sort of an insight into how the car industry works is that if they're replacing a car, so say there was a new Vauxhall Astra coming up and they've still got old ones to sell, they don't tell you about the new one until almost the last minute because they don't want to have to discount all those old ones. If it's
Yeah.
a car that they're launching and it's into a new sector for them, so like the Renault 5, the Zoe's dead, so they're launching a car which is going into a whole new thing, then they want people to start being interested long before. So they'll tell us about it, let us see it long before, so that people won't go out and buy a competitor and will get more and more interested as time goes on.
Yeah.
So it can be sort of weeks. I mean, like the Skoda Enyaq, they changed it without really mentioning it, didn't they? There
Yeah.
was a kind of a quiet mention of the fact it's got a better motor and battery. Whereas
There's
the Renault
another.
5 get ages.
Yeah, there's another one. There's another car that the Kia EV6 that they've just
Mhm.
very, very quietly, that's going to get an update, but nobody's
Mm.
spoken about it. And even as journalists, they don't want us in the cars because they don't want us talking about them either. So there is that. And I think what Clayton went on to say is, could we give more news perhaps about when cars then are coming? So if we've reviewed a car a few months ago, so I think that's probably something we should start to do.
Mm.
We can absolutely do that in the podcast if it's useful. We can start to say, oh, by the way, like we know last week Kia EV3, we saw that several months ago. Pricing is
Mm.
confirmed for that car now, and we know a bit more about it. So we try to mention it, but I think it's a really good point that we can't put it in the videos because we don't have that information, but also it can potentially really date the videos as well. So it's not massively relevant if you're watching the video in 6 months' time. But mainly it's because of what Tom's just said, is that often we just genuinely, we get in the cars too early to have that information.
On that theme, Jeff Johnson, I will paraphrase him slightly. He also said some nice things, so thank you, Jeff. Wants to know when we're going to drive the Renault 5 finally, after seeing your review in February of poking around it. And I
Ah,
think you know that, don't
go
you?
on. I do know that. It's second week in October. We'll actually be, one of the team will be in it earlier than that. We're actually going to be able to film with it in early October. So we'll be able to talk about it. I think it's all under embargo till around that date. So come the beginning of October, second week in October, we'll be able to tell you how it drives and if it's lived up to those. We've got some fairly high expectations of that car, haven't
I
we?
hope it's good.
I hope it's good too. I really hope it's good. So we're at the moment trying to think about what our cars of the year might be. So we'll do our
Mm.
Electrifying awards in a month or so, and that's definitely one that's on the list, isn't it? That we're hoping when we drive that, it's good. And actually, let us know if there's any cars that you think should be on our shortlist for cars of the year. I mean, EV3, the Insta, loads of different things. Let us know. Drop us a line in the comments below if you think we should be, something's really caught your idea or your eye this year that you love. Should I take one now, Tom?
Hmm.
Why does Manus love the Avenger? We have the answer to that one, so we've given you that at the start. Guilty pleasures, though, with that. How do I say that? Vorpal Teaspoon 8904. That's a brilliant YouTube name, isn't it? I think my guilty pleasure, like what you did there, guilt and then the
Mm.
letter E. Guilty pleasure is the new Ford Capri. Oh, maybe I'm just a sucker for the yellow paint scheme. Paint scheme. I do realise it shouldn't be called a Capri when a Granada or a Scorpio would be more appropriate. But that is my guilty pleasure, and I do like the Polestar 2 profile with a hint of the 2010 Dodge Charger at the front end.
Mm. There's a theme there, isn't there? The Capri and the Polestar 2 do look quite similar.
They do. They do. But then I like the way the Polestar 2 looks. And I don't. And we've got lots of people have called that out and commented on that on social when we put the pictures up. But I like the Polestar 2. And as is no surprise to anybody who listens to the podcast regularly, I don't love the Capri. Okay.
Maybe you'll drive it and think it's fantastic.
Maybe not. Right. What next? Go on. You take one.
Well, there's Bernard Hilton 3527 who says, I didn't feel guilty at the time, but looking back, my guilty pleasure was bombing around an MGB Roadster with the top down, making too much noise from the sports exhaust. Those were the days.
Oh, those days.
Yeah, maybe you can have a Cyberster, Bernard.
You can have a Cyberster, definitely, but for quite a hefty sum of money. And I think that is the thing that I still think we're missing from electric cars. We talk about the cars we'd like to see electric, and I'd love to see that, a smaller sort of two-seater sports car from MG. I would love to see an electric MX-5. We talk about this a lot on the podcast. So it is those little, small, light, more affordable roadsters. That I think is what we're missing still.
Mm.
Okay, I got a kind of an interesting one now about luxury car tax. Richard Hargrave 6082. Do you think that the so-called luxury car tax will be applied to EVs after April 25? It's the difference between affording a long-range scenic and having to go for a hybrid. The government are not giving incentives to go to EVs at all. And I think we know the answer to that one, don't we, Tom?
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting thing. So the luxury car tax will be applied to electric cars from April 25. So that's going to be quite a big difference in the road fund license that you pay for every year after the first year will be sort of 500 and something quid rather than zero as it currently is. So that's quite a big change. So you'll see, I think, a lot of manufacturers who've got cars currently which are maybe 41,000 who will suddenly change some of the spec to make it 39,995, including metallic
Yeah.
paint, because it includes the options. There's a story which I think Mike won't mind me telling you, which he's mentioned before, I think, of his i3. He bought at a discount and he didn't realize. He thought, well, I've saved some money here. I'll tick the box for the blue seat belts, which was £145, and it took the list price over £40,000, and it was a Rex, a plug-in, so it was subject to the tax, and he's had to pay £500 a year for every year since, and he every time he pulls on his seatbelt he regrets it. So you need to be careful. If your car is being registered before April 25, it won't be subject to that, so hurry up and get down to your dealer, otherwise you'll have to pay it.
I think the price alignment thing is interesting because we saw a lot of that. Do you remember when the last of the grant was taken away? Which there was the grant which was on was it 32,500 pounds in the end the grant came in at,
Yeah, I think
or
so.
was
It
it
went down and down and
it was
down, didn't
something
it? Yeah.
around then that it went down to that, but we saw lots of manufacturers just bringing the price of their cars down just to under the grant level so that it was still appealing. Now that doesn't make sense, does it? What did they do? Sorry, I'm having a nightmare today. It
Yeah,
was
they
when,
did.
do you remember there was an
Yeah, they
no
would
they
bring
just
down the price of their cars to be below the level, the price list price level, so they'd
yes,
get the grant.
so it does make sense, so just cut that
Yeah,
bit out, Manos. So yeah,
yeah,
so they were just below the list price level, and I think like you say we will see that, but coming back to that point, no, there isn't very much being done to help private buyers get into electric cars, and it's going to be interesting to see what the Labour government comes out with here in the UK, because certainly in the manifesto they had various ideas, didn't they? So we will be watching that carefully.
yeah.
And then I think we've had loads of questions in, Tom, on solar panels. Guinness is good for you says, can't believe I was thinking about solar panels on an EV roof only that morning. And lo and behold, you mentioned it in the first 5 minutes. Spooky or what? Were you in tune with Guinness is good for
Yeah,
you?
but well, we must be. It's. I think you can probably get it to work, and it will maybe just keep the 12-volt battery topped up. It will keep you, like we were talking earlier about the solar paint. It will keep the car cool in summer and just keep some air going through. It might help a little bit. Uh, Maybe it'll add another couple of miles to your range, but it'll add up over time.
But yeah, but I know when you did the maths on that, we're not really sure it's something that's worth forking out for, other than it's quite a fun gimmick to have.
Yeah, I think that if it's a £1,200 option, it doesn't make much sense. But if it's kind of, I don't know, baked into the whole car at the very beginning, or it's a couple of £100, it might be a nice thing to have. Of course, I mean, 2 miles on your range will be very valuable if you're 2 miles from home and your battery runs
Yeah.
out. But I think generally, it's not going to make much sense at that sort of price for an option.
It was interesting because talking about being baked in, sadly, the Fisker Ocean, which of course we're not going to talk about all those challenges they have again. But when I was out, I drove that sort of a year or so ago, and I was out in California, and I was chatting to the team there, and of course that's got a solar panel. And
Hmm.
we were sort of talking about how, this gimmick, is it useful? And actually, in a place like California, you were getting a meaningful amount of range from that. It was actually something that was actually great to have. It was built into the car. It wasn't an extra. When you are in a place where you just get days and days after day of sunshine, it is worth it. It's just probably not worth it here in the UK, where summer's about 2 weeks of the year at the moment.
Mm. I think that there probably still is a race across Australia, isn't there, where they have cars entirely powered by solar. So they just look like big
There abs-
teardrops with solar panels, and they can go across Australia with them.
there absolutely is, and I did I chatted and did an interview with a team from Durham University who were entering it last year. So it happens. I think it's either every couple of years. I think it's not every year, but it is. It's absolutely that, and it's all about pushing the edges of engineering, and it's fascinating. But the cars do look utterly ridiculous. But yeah, if you haven't seen that, it's worth looking at, just because it is a bit like wacky races brought to life. Anyway, on that note, you have been listening to the Kilowatt Half Hour, and as we were saying earlier, if you aren't already, do subscribe to the channel, because you see that big smile that Manos has on his face. It gets a little bit bigger every time somebody subscribes.